The moment he chose her over me was the moment he lost everything he thought he owned. I remember standing there, the cold air pressing against my skin like something invisible was trying to hold me in place, and for a second I couldn't even tell if I was breathing or not. The room felt too quiet, too still, like the world had paused just long enough for me to realize that nothing in my life was what I thought it was. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 34 years old, and until a few months ago I believed I had a stable marriage, a home, a future that made sense. I believed in routines, in shared dinners, in the way Daniel used to look at me when we first got married like I was the only person in the room. That version of my life feels like a different lifetime now, like something I watched happen to someone else. Because the man I married, the man I trusted, slowly became someone I didn't recognize. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started with small things that were easy to ignore if you wanted to. Late nights at work. Messages he wouldn't open in front of me. A tone in his voice that felt distant, distracted, like his mind was always somewhere else. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself this is what marriage looks like after years together, that things change, that people get busy. But deep down, there was this quiet feeling I couldn't shake, something sitting in my chest that kept whispering, something is wrong. I remember one night in particular. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. It was past midnight. Daniel still wasn't home. I stood by the kitchen counter staring at my phone, rereading a message he had sent hours earlier. Working late. Don't wait up. Simple. Cold. Final. I don't know why that message felt different from the others, but it did. It felt like a line had been drawn somewhere I couldn't see yet. I didn't call him. I didn't text back. I just stood there, letting that silence settle around me, heavier with every second. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for me to stop making excuses. Because somewhere between the late nights and the unanswered questions, I had started losing pieces of myself without even realizing it. I had become smaller, quieter, more careful with my words, like I was trying not to disturb something fragile that only existed in my head. But that night, standing alone in my own home, I understood something clearly for the first time. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overreacting. I was being left behind slowly, deliberately, by the person who was supposed to stand beside me. And what I didn't know yet was just how far he had already gone. The next morning felt strangely normal, and that was the part that unsettled me the most. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows, soft and warm, landing on the same clean countertops, the same coffee mug I had used every day for years, the same quiet house that once felt like home. I stood there holding my cup, watching the steam rise slowly, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself that nothing had changed. That everything I felt the night before was just a passing thought, something I had imagined because I was tired or emotional. But then I heard the front door open. Daniel walked in like it was any other morning, like he had not stayed out all night, like there was nothing unusual about the way he moved through the house without looking at me. He placed his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, and poured himself a glass of water. No explanation. No apology. Not even a glance in my direction. I watched him quietly, trying to read something in his face, any sign that he felt the distance between us. But there was nothing. Just calm, controlled indifference. That silence spoke louder than anything he could have said. I set my cup down slowly. My hands were steady, but inside everything felt tight, like a wire pulled too far. You came home late, I said, keeping my voice even. He nodded slightly without meeting my eyes. Work, he replied, short and simple. One word. No details. No effort to make it believable. I waited, thinking maybe he would add something, maybe he would look at me and explain, but he did not. Instead, he checked his phone, scrolling through something that seemed far more important than the conversation we were not having. That was when I noticed it. A name on his screen. Just for a second, but it was enough. Sophia. The letters stayed in my mind long after he locked the phone and set it face down on the counter. I did not ask about it. Not yet. Instead, I watched him walk past me, heading upstairs like I was not even there. And in that moment, I realized something that felt both small and devastating at the same time. I was no longer part of his world. I was just someone existing in the same house. Later that afternoon, I found myself sitting in my car outside a small cafe across town, staring through the window at a table near the back. I did not plan to come here. I did not even remember driving. But there I was, my fingers gripping the steering wheel, my heart beating slower than I expected, almost too calm. Inside, Daniel was sitting across from her. Sophia. She was younger than me, dressed effortlessly, laughing at something he said like it was the most natural thing in the world. And Daniel, he looked different. Relaxed. Present. The version of him I had not seen in months. For a long moment I just sat there watching them, waiting for the feeling to hit me, the anger, the shock, the pain. But what came instead was something quieter. Something colder. A clear, steady understanding that what I had feared was not just in my head. It was real. And it had already gone further than I was ready to admit. I did not walk into that cafe, and that choice stayed with me longer than anything else. Instead, I sat there for what felt like hours, watching the way Daniel leaned forward when she spoke, the way his expression softened, the way he gave her the kind of attention I had been missing piece by piece without even realizing it. At some point, I stopped trying to understand what I was seeing and simply accepted it for what it was. When they finally stood up to leave, I started my car and pulled away before they could see me, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind unusually quiet. The drive home felt longer than usual, even though the roads were familiar, every turn and traffic light part of a routine I had followed for years. But nothing about it felt routine anymore. When I walked back into the house, everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, and yet it felt completely different, like I was stepping into a place that no longer belonged to me. That night, Daniel came home earlier than I expected. He moved through the house with the same calm presence, as if nothing had changed, as if the version of him I had seen just hours earlier did not exist. I watched him from across the room, studying every small detail, the way he set his phone down carefully, the way he avoided direct eye contact, the way his answers stayed short whenever I spoke. "How was your day?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Busy," he replied without hesitation. Just one word again. It was almost impressive how consistent he was. I nodded slightly, pretending that was enough, pretending that I believed him. But this time I was not asking to hear the truth. I was asking to see how far he would go to hide it. Later that evening, while he was in the shower, I found myself standing near the edge of the bed, staring at his phone on the nightstand. I had never gone through his things before. Not once in our entire marriage. I used to believe that trust meant not needing to check. But trust had already been broken long before I reached for that phone. My fingers hesitated for just a second before I picked it up. The screen lit up instantly, and there it was again. Sophia. This time I did not look away. Message after message filled the screen, each one more personal than the last. Conversations that stretched late into the night. Words that were soft, familiar, intimate in a way that felt painfully misplaced. I did not read everything. I did not need to. I had already seen enough. But then something else caught my attention. A photo. My breath slowed as I opened it, not because I was surprised, but because I was preparing myself for whatever came next. The image was simple. A small room, soft lighting, and in the center of it, a baby, wrapped in a pale blanket, eyes closed, completely unaware of anything beyond that moment. My chest tightened, not from shock but from the quiet realization settling in deeper than anything else I had felt so far. This was not just a relationship. This was something permanent. Something that had been building behind my back while I was still trying to hold together a life that no longer existed. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it, my movements slow and deliberate, like I was finishing something that had already ended. And as I stood there in the silence of that room, one thought became impossible to ignore. This was no longer about suspicion. This was proof. And everything after this moment would be a choice. The sound of the shower running in the bathroom filled the silence, steady and distant, like it belonged to a different life, one that had nothing to do with me anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting lightly on my knees, staring at the same spot on the floor without really seeing it. The image of that baby stayed in my mind, clear and unmoving, like it had carved itself into something deeper than memory. I tried to feel something strong, something sharp enough to match what I had just discovered, but instead there was only this quiet heaviness, like everything inside me had slowed down at once. When Daniel walked out of the bathroom a few minutes later, drying his hair with a towel, he looked exactly the same as he always did. Calm, put together, familiar in a way that almost felt unreal now. He glanced at me briefly, just enough to acknowledge I was there, then moved toward the closet without saying anything. For a moment I watched him in silence, noticing details I had ignored for years, the way he avoided eye contact, the way his movements were efficient, controlled, like he had already decided what mattered and what did not. I stood up slowly, my voice steady when I finally spoke. Who is Sophia? The question hung in the air between us, simple but impossible to misunderstand. Daniel froze for just a second, so small most people would have missed it, but I did not. Then he turned toward me, his expression neutral, almost bored. A colleague, he said. The answer came too quickly, too smoothly. I nodded slightly, taking a step closer. A colleague you meet late at night? I asked. My tone did not change, but something underneath it shifted, something colder. He let out a quiet breath, like this conversation was already inconvenient. You are overthinking, he replied. For a moment I just looked at him, studying his face, searching for anything real. I saw you, I said quietly. That was when his expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. A slight tightening around his eyes. A pause before he spoke again. And, he asked. One word. No denial. No explanation. Just a challenge. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything he could have said. I felt my chest tighten, but I did not look away. There is a child, I continued, my voice almost a whisper now, not because I was afraid, but because I needed to hear the words out loud. For a second he did not respond. Then he looked at me directly, and for the first time there was no attempt to hide anything. Yes, he said. Just that. No hesitation. No regret. The word landed harder than I expected, not because it was loud, but because it was so simple. So final. I waited, giving him space to explain, to say something that would make sense of everything, but nothing came. Instead he turned away, like the conversation was already over. Something inside me shifted again, this time sharper, clearer. How long? I asked. He shrugged slightly, like the answer did not matter. Long enough, he said. I let out a slow breath, feeling something inside me settle into place. Something cold and steady that replaced the confusion I had been holding on to. And what am I supposed to be in all of this? I asked. He paused for a moment, then looked at me again, his expression unreadable. You are making this more complicated than it needs to be, he said. Those words stayed in the air, heavier than anything else. Not because of what they meant, but because of what they revealed. In that moment I understood something clearly. To him this was not a betrayal. It was just an adjustment. And I was the only one who had not been informed. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, and the silence between us felt heavier than anything that had been said. I stood there watching him as if I was seeing him for the first time, not as the man I married, but as someone who had quietly rewritten our entire life without telling me. An adjustment, I repeated slowly, letting the word settle in my mouth like something bitter. Is that what you call this? Daniel did not answer immediately. He walked past me, calm and composed, like this was just another conversation he needed to get through. He picked up his phone, glanced at it, then set it back down again, as if whatever was on that screen mattered more than the woman standing in front of him. You are reacting emotionally, he said finally, his tone flat. We can figure this out if you stop making it dramatic. I let out a quiet breath, not because I was calming down, but because I was realizing how far gone this situation really was. Figure what out? I asked, my voice steady. You have another woman. You have a child. And you expect me to stand here and treat this like a scheduling conflict. He frowned slightly, not with guilt but with irritation. It is not that simple, he replied. Things happened. I did not plan it like this. I looked at him, searching for even a trace of responsibility in his words. But there was none. Just excuses wrapped in calm delivery. But you kept it, I said. You built a second life while I was still living in the first one. That seemed to hit something, not emotionally but strategically. He turned fully toward me now, his expression more focused. Lower your voice, he said quietly. There is no reason to escalate this. The shift in his tone did not make me quieter. It made everything clearer. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked. "You are worried about tone?" He took a step closer, his voice still controlled but firmer now. "I am telling you to be reasonable." The word reasonable echoed in my mind, and for a second I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so completely disconnected from reality. "Reasonable would have been telling me the truth," I said. "Reasonable would have been choosing not to lie to me for months, maybe years." His jaw tightened slightly, the first real sign of tension I had seen from him. "This is not helping," he said. "We can work through this if you stop attacking me." That was the moment something inside me changed again, sharper this time, like a line being drawn that could not be erased. "I am not attacking you," I replied quietly. "I am finally seeing you." The room fell silent again, but this silence felt different. Not heavy, not confusing, just clear. I could feel my heartbeat slow, steady, controlled, like my body had caught up with something my mind had already accepted. "You made your choices," I continued, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. "Now I will make mine." Daniel studied me for a moment, like he was trying to figure out what that meant, but I did not explain. Not yet, because for the first time since this began, I was not reacting anymore. I was thinking, and somewhere beneath the anger, beneath the disappointment, something else was starting to take shape. Something quiet, something patient. Because if he believed this was just another situation he could manage, another problem he could talk his way out of, then he had already underestimated me. And that was going to be his biggest mistake. That night, I did not argue anymore. And that alone seemed to confuse him more than anything I had said before. I moved through the house quietly, almost methodically, like I was following a routine that no longer required his presence. I brushed my hair, changed into something comfortable, and turned off the lights one by one, leaving only the soft glow from the hallway. Daniel watched me for a while, his expression unreadable, like he was waiting for another reaction, another emotional response he could dismiss or control. But I gave him nothing. Not anger, not tears, not even frustration, just silence. And silence, I realized, unsettled him far more than anything else. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was still, wrapped in that quiet moment before the day begins, when everything feels suspended. I stood in the kitchen pouring coffee, watching the dark liquid fill the cup slowly, and for the first time in a long time my thoughts felt clear. Not crowded, not chaotic, just focused. Daniel came downstairs a few minutes later, already dressed, his movements efficient as always. He glanced at me briefly, like he was trying to read something in my face, but I kept my expression neutral. "We should talk later," he said, reaching for his keys. I nodded once. "Of course," I replied calmly. He hesitated for a second, like he expected more, then left without another word. The moment the door closed, the silence returned, but it felt different now. Not empty, intentional. I walked back upstairs into the bedroom and opened the drawer where we kept our documents. It was something I had organized years ago, neatly labeled folders, everything in its place. Insurance papers, property records, business agreements. At the time it felt like responsibility. Now it felt like preparation. I pulled out one folder after another, my fingers moving slowly, deliberately, like I was rediscovering something I had forgotten. And then I saw it. His company documents. The ones he rarely talked about in detail, the ones he always handled personally, but had asked me to help organize when things were still normal. I sat down on the edge of the bed, opening the folder carefully, scanning through pages filled with numbers, signatures, agreements that once meant nothing to me beyond support. But now every line felt different. Every detail mattered. I remembered late nights when he would sit at the dining table explaining parts of his business to me, not because he had to, but because he wanted to share it. Back then I listened because I cared. Now I remember because I understood. And what I understood changed everything. There were accounts I had forgotten about. Investments tied to decisions I had been present for. Legal structures that were not as simple as they appeared from the outside. I leaned back slightly, the paper still in my hands, my heartbeat steady, controlled. For the first time since all of this began, I did not feel like I was losing something. I felt like I was seeing something clearly. Daniel believed he had control. He believed this situation would settle the way everything else had, quietly, without consequence. But he forgot one thing. I was there from the beginning. I knew where everything started. And more importantly, I knew where it could end. I did not rush, and that was the part that made everything feel different. For years I had reacted quickly, emotionally, trying to fix things before they broke completely, trying to hold together something that was already slipping through my hands. But now I moved slowly, carefully, like every step mattered. Over the next few days I watched Daniel the same way he had been ignoring me, quietly, without confrontation, without drawing attention. He went about his routine like nothing had changed, leaving early, coming home late, his phone never far from his hand. And every time he thought I was not looking, I noticed the small things, the way his expression softened when he read certain messages, the way he stepped outside to take calls he did not want me to hear. It was no longer painful to watch. It was informative. One evening he mentioned he had a meeting across town. His tone was casual, almost rehearsed, like he expected no questions. I nodded, the same calm response I had given him every day. Of course, I said. But this time I did not stay home. I followed him. The city lights blurred past as I drove, keeping enough distance so he would not notice, my hand steady on the wheel, my mind focused in a way it had not been before. When he pulled into a quiet residential street, I slowed down, parking a few houses away. The neighborhood was peaceful, lined with identical houses, soft porch lights glowing in the early evening. I watched as he stepped out of his car, adjusted his jacket, and walked up to one of the doors like he had done it 100 times before. The door opened almost immediately. Sophia. Even from a distance I could see the familiarity in the way she greeted him, the ease, the lack of hesitation. And then I saw it again. The baby. This time not just a photo on a screen but real. She held the child carefully, gently, like something precious, something protected. Daniel stepped inside without looking back, and the door closed behind him, leaving the quiet street exactly as it had been before. For a moment I sat there, my eyes fixed on that closed door, waiting for something to happen inside me. Anger, pain, anything. But instead there was only clarity. This was not a mistake. Not something temporary. This was a life he had chosen, built piece by piece while I stood on the outside of it without even knowing. I leaned back in my seat slowly, letting out a quiet breath I did not realize I had been holding. And in that moment, something inside me settled completely. The confusion was gone. The questions were gone. There was nothing left to figure out. Only something left to do. I started the car again, the engine humming softly as I pulled away from the curb, the street disappearing behind me in the rearview mirror. He believed he was managing two lives, balancing them carefully, keeping everything under control. But what he did not realize was that I had already stepped out of the life he thought I was still living in. And once I stopped trying to belong in it, I could finally see the truth clearly. This was no longer about what he had done. It was about what I was going to do next. And for the first time that thought did not scare me. Felt inevitable. The next morning everything looked exactly the same, but I was not. I moved through the house with a quiet precision, noticing details I had ignored for years, the placement of documents, the structure of accounts, the habits Daniel followed without thinking. It was strange how predictable everything became once I stopped being emotionally involved. Patterns appeared where there had once been confusion. Weaknesses revealed themselves where I had once seen stability. I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, the soft glow of the screen reflecting in my eyes as I reviewed files I had not touched in years. Financial statements, partnership agreements, authorization records. At the time I had helped organize them out of trust. Now I read them with purpose. Every number told a story. Every signature revealed a connection. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to understand the full structure of what Daniel had built. It was not as secure as he believed. Not as independent as he presented it to the world. In fact, much of it traced back to decisions we had made together, accounts we had opened jointly, assets that were not solely under his control. He had always handled the business publicly, but behind the scenes there were layers he had forgotten I had access to. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table, my mind already several steps ahead. This was not about anger anymore. It was about leverage. Later that afternoon, I made a few quiet phone calls. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just calm, professional conversations with people who knew me, who trusted me, who remembered the role I had played long before I became invisible in my own marriage. Advisors. Contact. Individuals who did not ask unnecessary questions, but understood tone, intention, timing. I did not explain everything. I did not need to. I simply asked the right questions. And the answers I received confirmed what I had already suspected. There were ways to shift control. Legal pathways. Financial pressure points. Nothing illegal. Nothing reckless. Just strategic. That evening when Daniel walked through the door, I was sitting in the living room, the lights dim, the space quiet. He paused for a moment when he saw me, like something about the atmosphere felt different, even if he could not explain why. "You are home early," he said, placing his keys down. I nodded slightly. "So are you," I replied. Our conversation stayed simple, almost polite, like two people discussing the weather instead of the collapse of a marriage. He sat across from me, glancing at his phone briefly, then back at me, as if trying to read something he could not quite understand. "We should decide what we are doing," he said after a moment. "About us." I held his gaze calmly, my expression unchanged. "You already decided," I said quietly. The words landed softly, but they stayed there between us. He frowned slightly, like he was about to respond, but then stopped. For the first time he looked uncertain. Not guilty. Not regretful. Just unsure. And that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. He still believed he had control of the situation. He still believed this was something he could manage, something he could shape with the right words, the right timing. But he had no idea what I had already set in motion. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my sleeve, my movements calm, deliberate. "Do not worry," I said, my voice steady. "We will resolve everything soon." He watched me carefully now, something shifting behind his eyes, but it was too late for him to understand it fully. Because while he was still thinking about what to say next, I had already moved on to what comes after that. And this time I was not reacting to his choices. I was controlling the outcome. The shift did not happen in a single moment, and that was what made it so powerful. It unfolded quietly, step by step, exactly the way everything else in our life had been built, only this time I was the one in control. Over the next 2 weeks, small things began to change, subtle at first, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Accounts were reviewed. Permissions were adjusted. Conversations took place behind closed doors. Calm voices discussing details that once seemed insignificant, but now carried weight. I did not rush any of it. Timing mattered more than speed. Daniel, on the other hand, continued exactly as before, confident in a routine that no longer protected him. He went to work, attended meetings, checked his phone, lived between two worlds without realizing that one of them was already collapsing beneath him. The first sign appeared on a Monday morning. I was in the kitchen when I heard his voice from the living room, slightly sharper than usual, speaking on the phone. I did not move. I did not need to. "What do you mean the transfer is on hold?" he asked, his tone controlled but strained. There was a pause, then he spoke again, slower this time. "That account does not require secondary authorization." Another pause. Longer. I could almost hear the confusion forming in his mind, the pieces not fitting the way they always had before. I took a quiet sip of my coffee, letting the moment pass without interruption. By the afternoon, the second call came. This time his voice carried a different edge, less controlled, more urgent. Questions about approvals, about signatures, about access that suddenly required verification he did not expect. Each answer he received only led to more questions, and with every conversation, the certainty he relied on began to slip. That evening, when he walked through the door, his expression was no longer calm. It was focused, tense, like he was trying to solve a problem that did not have a simple answer. He found me in the living room, exactly where I had been the night before. The same quiet setting, the same steady atmosphere. But this time he did not hesitate. "What did you do?" he asked directly. I looked up at him slowly, meeting his gaze without any urgency. "What do you mean?" I replied, my voice even. He stepped closer, his jaw tight, his posture no longer relaxed. "The accounts. The approvals. Something changed," he said. "And it traces back here." For a moment I said, Nothing, letting the silence stretch just enough for him to feel it. Then I stood up, smoothing my sleeve the same way I had before, my movements calm, deliberate. You built something impressive, I said quietly. But you never built it alone. His expression shifted, not fully understanding, but sensing enough to know that something was wrong. Something bigger than a simple error. You should have remembered that, I continued. The room fell silent again, but this time it was not uncertain. It was final. He looked at me like he was seeing someone new, someone he had never taken the time to understand. And in that moment, I realized something that felt almost ironic. He had spent so long dividing his life into two separate worlds, believing he could control both, that he never noticed the one person who understood the foundation of everything he had. This is just the beginning, I said softly. Not as a threat, not as anger, just a statement of fact. Because what he was experiencing